This is a video about Greek mythology and interesting insights into just information to think about. Very interesting information. It makes you think. Um, there used to be a bunch of gods and goddesses that were real, and as hard as it is to believe that gods and goddesses could be real, well, we don't see them anymore because God withdrew His presence from the world. So understand that there was a time when God used to come down here, but it was more than just Him, one person or one God. It was many goddesses and goddess bodies, and many gods that had god bodies. Now, gods and goddess bodies were bigger than human. They were, I guess, 9 to 12 feet tall, and ultimately they were made of entirely different biochemistry. So the goddess and god bodies that were actually goddess heads and godheads, they were godheads and goddess heads of a collective of collectives of people that would worship them or get on their mental spiritual channel. And so because they're heading collectives, a godhead heads a collective, and the collective is influenced by the godhead directly. And so the will of the godhead is what the collective is keying into, and as a whole the collective listens to the godhead, feels it. It's mostly done through feelings, also through interpretation of feelings, and is a big huge part of it. Interpreting feelings is hard to do, because if you're trying to figure out what the godhead is saying to you, and he's only talking to your feelings, that means he's talking to your heart and not your head, which means that the way that the godheads or the goddess heads would talk to you would be through to your heart directly and not including your head, which meant you would feel what they're going to tell you. You wouldn't hear any words. You wouldn't get any indication that the goddess or godhead was talking to you. You would only feel something strange and wonder what it was. So you'd wonder what is that trying to tell me? And ultimately if you know you're trying to follow the godhead, then you're trying to interpret the feelings. So you're trying to get the feelings and have them and then interpret them. And ultimately everyone will interpret differently. And of course that will start arguments. And ultimately that's what high priests are appointed for. High priests are appointed for their skill and determining the will of the gods. And different high priests had capabilities to interpret feelings. And since the gods and goddesses didn't talk directly to our heads, we couldn't witness what they were saying. We only felt it. What is that feeling? I don't know. It was very difficult in many cases for anyone to interpret anything. And ultimately the high priests lived to interpret feelings. They lived to interpret direct feelings related to the godhead or goddess, and they were skilled in it. And some high priests were much better than others. They literally knew what the gods wanted, what the gods demanded, and ultimately they could tell you. So if you had a skill of being a high priest, then you would be able to interpret the will of the gods and goddesses, and you would be able to you know what they want, what their will is, what they're determined to demand, or what they absolutely say. So Apollo was the sun god, the son of Zeus, and I think he's dead now. So ultimately, if he's still alive, he's in a human collective. So understand that when the godhead is killed off and destroyed, the collective's still left, which means that the godhead gets into the collective in spirit. So the godhead is the head of the spirits, a living god or a living goddess, and it actually rules the collective, influencing it directly. And when the god or goddess head is killed, or if they are, then there is no godhead anymore for the collective, and the collective still has the spirit of the god that's dead. It's in the collective, but not in the godhead that's been killed, which means that all the god and goddesses head, all the goddess and god heads were removed by destroying them. All the goddesses were destroyed. I think only one goddess, if goddesses are hiding and pretending to be destroyed, that's possible, meaning they're out of the picture. They're not at all coming forward. In other words, they're either hiding, pretending to be dead, so they fake their own deaths, or they actually died. And when we had one God come into the picture back in the BC times, suddenly there was one God. Well, what they didn't mention was that there was a removal of all the goddesses from the entire world. All the temples were destroyed. All the Venus temples, all of them were destroyed. And basically, well, I'm not going to say good reason, because ultimately, I can feel for the divine feminine, and I do. So I see her that she has a point, and like saying that it was wrong. Obviously, don't say it was for good reason. So I feel that that's what she's telling me. Like, don't say it's for good reason. It was not for good reason. Ultimately, the one God would say it was for a good reason, because he wouldn't agree with her. And ultimately, she's still alive. Now, she's alive in the collective of people, which means that when the goddesses and gods were killed and there was only one God left, then we became a one God world with one God, because of the fact that the many gods and goddesses of the pantheon, well, they were all murdered off by the one God who killed them all. Ultimately, the story of why he had to do it was to preserve his own godhead, meaning that when it becomes that gods and goddesses start fighting and killing each other and going to straight up war, it becomes imperative to utterly destroy the enemy so that they don't exist anymore, so they can't kill you. Because ultimately, if the gods and goddesses existed and there's many of them, they were all very dangerously in danger with each other, because they could kill each other. Gods could die, and gods do die. The reality is it's hard to kill a god, and if they're not assaulted or chopped into pieces, then they don't die. So they do die. If you chop a god up in pieces and take his head off, well, you could put his head over on 100 miles that way, put his torso 100 miles the other way. Well, yeah, he might squiggle around, but the body will never find the head again. Ultimately, there's ways to kill the god and goddess, and ultimately some are simple, some are not so, some are crude. So Apollo loved his priests. Apollo was very loving towards Troy, and he loved his people. He loved the Trojans, and he totally approved of them. And ultimately, the women in the Trojan collective, based on Minerva and Hera, basically Minerva and Hera had a collective of Trojan women. Well, the Trojan women reflected the behavior of the goddess Hera and Minerva. And Hera was mad at Zeus, what was the goddess that was the head goddess, mother goddess, the most powerful one. She was the wife and perhaps sister of Zeus. And ultimately, she wanted equal power with Zeus, and she wanted that equal say. She also wanted to overrule him if possible, and she did overrule him often enough to where he had enough of it. And he had told Hera many times that I am the father of all the gods and goddesses. My name is Zeus, and don't screw with me, because I will throw you off Mount Olympus, and ultimately you will die. And don't mess with me then. I don't think you're equal to me, because I'm above you, and I'm the only one. There's only one me. And ultimately, he told all the gods and goddesses that. So basically, the gods and goddesses knew Zeus was the man and the one and the only and the dad, and the rest of them were all daughters and sons. So all the goddesses were just daughters of Zeus, and probably other. There could have been other goddesses from other things. Not all of them were from Hera and Zeus. They were from Zeus, who was cheating on Hera, according to Hera. And Zeus had impregnated many different women, from many human women. He had sex with human women. He had sex with goddesses of different types of goddesses that were mixed with other goddesses and gods. So Zeus impregnated a lot of different forms of gods and goddesses and humans. Many humans, women, so that there were demigods created, demigoddesses created from the actual gods having sex with the humans. So they mixed. The gods came down to earth and had sex with humans, and it caused humans to be born that were special, had abilities, heroes, became legends. And like Hercules is a good example. In fact, I could talk about him in my next video. Apollo was very protective of his high priests, because his high priests were dedicated to him utterly loyal and would like to the core, meaning they dedicated their whole life to him. And ultimately, the 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 high priest of Apollo, well, there's only one that was like at the top, and he was a pope. And well, like a pope, you know, like he was the one who talked to him directly to give all the instructions to the ones below. And ultimately, maybe any of them could talk to Apollo at that time, because it wasn't literally necessarily a chain of command that had to be followed, although there was a chain of command that had to be followed. And ultimately, Zeus had to destroy his whole family, and there became one god. Apollo was a god that used to throw plagues on people, he used to cause disease. He also was a healing doctor. So he was a god of healing and curing, and ultimately a god of inflicting diseases upon people too, and plagues. He started plagues. He threw a plague on the entire Greek fleet when they hit the beach. I think for 9 days, people were just dropping right and left dead from the plague, because